Hey, how are you? Are you anything like me? Do you watch the news and hear about billions being spent on the war with Iran? But then here's the question nobody asks. Where does that money come from? And who profits when the checks are written? The formula is older than America itself. War converted into debt, and debt converted right back into war. Today we crack open section 3 of this short little book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. We're reading the summaries of every chapter, like the author recommended to begin reading the book. So sit back, buckle in, and let's go. Welcome back, Seekers, to the Hodl Boomer Podcast, a Bitcoin podcast for latecomers like me. Let me describe it a little bit further. If you have been working your whole life and suddenly realize that your currency is being debased, that everything you saved is really not worth as much as you thought it would be, and that it may not last through your retirement, you began to look for various answers, and you realized that this thing called Bitcoin might hold some promise. And we also think people other than boomers are going to be interested in this too. We have been, over the past several weeks, studying The Creature from Jekyll Island in a way that the author, G. Edward Griffin, has asked us to, and that's to read the summaries first, and then, after you read the summaries and understand the concepts, dig into this big book and read it cover to cover. We're hoping that's what happens here. For me, one of the biggest aha moments in The Creature from Jekyll Island was realizing that wars can't be fought without kind of magic money. It's the age-old discussion. Do we use honest weights and scales, as world religions and Christianity in particular talk about? Or do we use debased and manipulated money and see it being abused? Well, the old pattern, using debased, manipulated money, keeps on repeating itself. Today, we'll discuss how elites turned war profit into high profit using fiat alchemy. Before we jump in, let me just mention our website and our store, hodlantees.org. You can find all kinds of resources there. You can find the Bitcoin price. You can find various t-shirts, various caps, various things where we say, wear the message. It's more about the mission than it is about the merch. So let's dig into The Creature from Jekyll Island. Why this episode matters. We think war is political, but it's actually financial. The oldest game in the book is create money from nothing, then lend it to nations at war, profit, whether they win or whether they lose. Section 3 of Jekyll Island lays it bare and explains how this happens. And you guys will begin to understand and to see how the formula works very clearly. The first section is called the Rothschild Formula. In it, you'll discover that war is converted into debt, and debt is converted back into war. Both sides get loans. The lender wins either way. Nathan Rothschild was the guy funding both Napoleon and Britain back around World War I. War becomes self-perpetuating when financed by fiat. Without this magic money printing, wars end really fast because they're way too expensive. So I'm going to read from you the summary of this chapter from The Creature from Jekyll Island. Just a reminder, we're taking G. Edward Griffin at his word and reading the summaries first, leading us to digging into the chapters and reading all of the footnotes there. So pardon me while I look down and read exactly what is meant by the Rothschild Formula. It begins. By the end of the 18th century, the House of Rothschild has become one of the most successful financial institutions in the world has ever known. Its meteoric rise can be attributed to the great industry and shrewdness of the five brothers who established themselves in various capitals of Europe and forged the world's first international financial network. As pioneers in the practice of lending money to governments, they soon learned that this provided unique opportunities to parlay wealth into political power as well. Before long, most of the princes and kings of Europe had come within their influence. The Rothschilds also had mastered the art of smuggling on a grand scale, often with the tacit approval of the governments whose laws they violated. This was perceived by all parties as an unofficial bonus for providing needed funding to those same governments, particularly in time of war. The fact that different branches of the Rothschild network also might be providing funds for the enemy was pragmatically ignored. Thus, a time-honored practice among financiers was born, profiting from both sides. The Rothschilds operated a highly efficient and intelligence-gathering system, which provided them with the advanced knowledge of important events, knowledge which was invaluable for investment decisions. When an exhausted Rothschild courier delivered the first news of the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan was able to deceive the London bond traders into selling panic that allowed him to acquire the dominant holding of England's entire debt, but at a tiny fraction of its worth. A study of these and similar events revealed a personality profile not just of the Rothschilds, but to that special breed of international financiers whose success typically is built upon certain character traits. Those include cold objectivity, immunity to patriotism, and indifference to the human condition. That profile is the basis for proposing a theoretical strategy called the Rothschild Formula, which motivates such men to propel governments into war for the profits they yield. This formula most likely has never been consciously phrased as it appears here, but subconscious motivations and personality traits work together to implement it nevertheless. As long as the mechanisms of central banking exist, it will be, to such men, an irresistible temptation to convert debt into perpetual war and war into perpetual debt. In the following chapters, we'll track the distinctive footprint of the Rothschild Formula as it leads up to our own doorstep in the present day. So this is kind of a long chapter, but the basic understanding is really clear. There were very moneyed people at that time in the world. Rothschilds were chief among them. And they figured out that getting close to government and being able to support both sides of that government would be highly profitable for them. It's really simple. Loan both sides the money, try to manipulate the war, and no matter who wins or who loses, your fortunes increase. The next section, it's chapter 12 of the Creature from Jekyll Island, is called Sink the Lusitania. And in it, it talks about how J.P. Morgan, another financier at the time, was able to manipulate kind of the outcome of the situation with the Lusitania. It was a cruise ship, and there were a lot of Americans on board. And J.P. Morgan, at the time, lent heavily to England and to France during World War I. Around that time, Germany was winning, and Morgan's loans were at risk because he was not backing the Germans. He was backing the British and Americans. So this British ship was sailing, and it carried a lot of American passengers and munitions. The ship sunk. As a result, America entered into the war, and Morgan's loans then became safe. The war debt was repaid with interest financed by American taxpayers. That's crazy. Rothschilds were involved in both sides of the war. Morgan was involved in one side of the war. But he, even though he was not at the same level as the Rothschilds, he was able to manipulate matters such that the Lusitania was sunk and America would be annoyed because we lost so many on the Lusitania. And we entered the war. Here's the summary of Sink the Lusitania from the Creature from Jekyll Island. To finance the early stages of World War I, England and France had borrowed heavily from investors in America and had selected the House of Morgan as a sales agent for their bonds. Morgan also acted as their U.S. purchasing agent for war materials, thus profiting from both ends of the cash flow. Once when the money was borrowed and again when it was spent. Further profits were derived from production contracts placed with companies within the Morgan orbit. But the war began to go badly for the Allies when Germany's submarines took virtual control of the Atlantic shipping lanes. As England and France moved closer to defeat or a negotiated peace on Germany's terms, it became increasingly difficult to sell their bonds. No bonds meant no purchases, and the Morgan cash flow was threatened. Furthermore, if the previously sold bonds should go into default, as they certainly would in the wake of defeat, the Morgan Consortium would suffer gigantic losses. The only way to save the British Empire, to restore the value of the bonds, and to sustain the Morgan cash flow was for the United Nations government to provide the money. But since neutral nations were prohibited from doing that by treaty, America would have to be brought into the war. A secret agreement to that effect was made between British officials and Colonel House, with the concurrence of the President. From that point forward, Wilson began to pressure Congress for a declaration of war. This was done at the very time he was campaigning for re-election on the slogan, "He kept us out of the war." Meanwhile, Morgan purchased control over major segments of the news media and engineered a nationwide editorial blitz against Germany, calling for war as an act of American patriotism. Morgan had created an international shipping cartel, including Germany's merchant fleet, which maintained a near monopoly on the high seas. Only the British Cunard lines remained aloof. The Lusitania was owned by Cunard and operated in completion with the Morgan's cartel. The Lusitania was built to military specifications and was registered with the British Admiralty as an armed auxiliary cruiser. She carried passengers as a cover to conceal her real mission, which was to bring contraband war materials from the United States. The fact was known to Wilson and others in his administration, but they did nothing to stop it. When the German embassy tried to publish a warning to American passengers, the State Department intervened and prevented newspapers from printing it. When the Lusitania left New York Harbor on her final voyage, she was virtually a floating ammunition depot. The British knew that to draw the United States into the war would mean the difference between defeat and victory. Anything that could accomplish that was proper, even the coldly calculated sacrifice of one of her greatest ships, with Englishmen aboard. But the trick was to have Americans on board also, in order to create the proper emotional climate within the United States. As the Lusitania moved into hostile waters where a German U-boat was known to be operating, First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, ordered her destroyer protection to abandon her. This, plus the fact that she had been ordered to travel at reduced speed, made her an easy target. After the impact, one well-placed torpedo, a mighty second explosion from within, ripped her apart, and the ship that many believed could not be sunk gurgled to the bottom in less than 18 minutes. The deed had been done. It set into motion great waves of revulsion against the Germans. These waves eventually flooded through Washington and swept the United States into the war. Within days of the declaration, Congress voted $1 billion in credit for England, and France $200 million was sent to England immediately and was applied to the Morgan account. The vast quantity of money needed to finance the war was created by the Federal Reserve System, which means that it was collected from Americans through that hidden tax called inflation. Within just 5 years, this tax had taken fully 1/2 of all they had saved. The infinitely higher cost in American blood was added to the bill. Thus it was that the separate motives of such diverse personalities as Winston Churchill, J.P. Morgan, Colonel House, and Woodrow Wilson all found common cause in bringing America into World War I. Churchill maneuvered for military advantage. Morgan sought the profits of the war. House schemed for political power, and Wilson dreamed of a chance to dominate a post-war League of Nations. I heard about this. I sort of knew about this, but it was never put into such stark factual language as in the G. Edward Griffin book. I've mentioned before that this book is highly footnoted, highly researched, very well documented, and you can believe the words in it are true. How many of you sitting there knew that we did this kind of garbage? That we did this to manipulate dollars? It's just incredible. Incredible that America would do this in order to support the big, important, moneyed people. The story continues. It doesn't get any prettier. Chapter 13 in The Creature from Jekyll Island is called Masquerade in Moscow. There was a secret society founded by a gentleman called Cecil Rhodes. It became the Council on Foreign Relations, and the American financiers who were behind this kind of covered it all up. We've heard of the CFR. We don't really know, most of us, what it did. The Red Cross was used as a cover to funnel funds into Russia at this time. The goal was to topple the Tsar and install a controlled opposition. You'll know what that phrase means in a little bit more. The Russian Revolution didn't happen organically. It was bankrolled. The pattern repeats. Chaos abroad, profit at home. Because of who is on the side of the war. Who is on the side manipulating the war? Well, both sides is where the money is. Let's dig into the masquerade in Moscow. The summary states, the Bolshevik Revolution was not a spontaneous uprising of the masses. It was planned, financed, and orchestrated by outsiders. Some of the financing came from Germany, which hoped that internal problems would force Russia out of the war against her. But most of the money and the leadership came from financiers in England and the United States. It was a perfect example of the Rothschild Formula in action. The group centered mainly around a secret society created by Cecil Rhodes, one of the world's wealthiest men at the time. The purpose of that group was nothing less than world domination and the establishment of a modern feudalist society controlled by the world's central banks. Headquartered in England, the Rhodes' innermost directorate was called the Round Table. In other countries, there were established subordinate structures called the Round Table groups. The Round Table group in the United States became known as the Council on Foreign Relations. The CFR, which was initially dominated by J.P. Morgan and later by the Rockefellers, is the most powerful group in America today. It is even more powerful than the federal government because almost all of the key positions in government are held by its members. In other words, it is the United States government. Agents of these two groups cooperated closely in pre-revolutionary Russia, and particularly after the Tsar was overthrown. The American contingent in Russia disguised itself as Red Cross mission, allegedly doing humanitarian work. Cashing in on their close friendship with Trotsky and Lenin, they obtained profitable business concessions from the new government, which returned their initial investment many times over. Good grief. If you've heard a little bit of this but never heard the full story, you're going to want to read more than the summary of The Creature from Jekyll Island. There are two responses to news like this. One is to bury your head in the sand and believe the media and say, well, that's okay. We're America. We're not going to get hurt. We're going to come out ahead at all times on this. The other is to take a step back and say, wait a minute. I'm on the side of right. I'm on the side of doing what's good instead of profiting from war and supporting war and supporting both sides of the people at war. It is not about creating high profits and lots and lots and lots of money for people at the top. And I can't believe, as a former business executive, I'm even saying this. I've woken up so much in the past 6 years, and I'm hoping that every one of you does too. Chapter 14 is the last chapter we'll cover today, and it is entitled The Best Enemy Money Can Buy. It talks about America's role in building up the Soviet Union after the revolution. Why would we do this? Because a credible enemy keeps defense budgets high. Once again, it's the Rothschild Formula. Perpetual conflict equals perpetual debt. Perpetual debt equals perpetual profit. Taxpayers fund both the enemy and the defense against the enemy. Let me say that again. Your dollars, taxpayers, they fund both the enemy and the defense against the enemy. Craziness. Sound money would end this. You can't print your way into endless war. Bitcoin has a fixed supply. You can begin to see how this hundreds of years old practice will begin to fall apart. Let's take a look at the summary of Chapter 14, The Best Enemy Money Can Buy. The Bolshevik Revolution was a coup d'etat in which a radical minority captured the Russian government from the moderate revolutionary majority. The Red Cross mission of New York financiers threw support to the Bolsheviks and in return received economic rewards in the form of rights to Russia's natural resources, plus contracts for construction and supplies. The continued participation in the economic development of Russia and Eastern Europe since at that time indicates that this relationship has survived to the present day. These financiers are not pro-communist. Their motivation is profit and power. They are now working to bring both Russia and the United States into a world government which they expect to control. War and the threats of war are tools to prod the masses toward the acceptance of that goal. It is essential, therefore, that the United States and the industrialized nations of the world have credible enemies. As these words are being written, Russia is wearing the mask of peace and cooperation. But we've seen that before. We may yet see a return of the evil empire when the timing is right. U.S. government and megabank funding, the first of Russian, now of Chinese, Middle Eastern capabilities, cannot be understood without this insight. Now remember, this book was published a while ago, way before Bitcoin came onto the scene. But the history of these machinations is solid. All of these manipulations are solid. They're still occurring. Bitcoin is poised to take away their power by taking money away. This isn't theory. It's all documented, and it's still happening. Think about that. Honest money with honest incentives can actually fix the money. And in doing so, it removes the fuel for endless war. Remember the stewardship angle that we talk about. We're called, good people, we're called to be wise, to see things clearly, and to build better systems. That's what it is. That's what it's all about. Bitcoin's dollar price, which is not a great way to look at it, but if you look at the dollar price of Bitcoin and you see it bouncing around, sort of bouncing sideways, if you can picture that, it's manipulated. There are very, very, very powerful interests that are buying and selling at just the right time to keep all of us confused. All we need to do is hodl. Hold on for dear life. Hang on to your Bitcoin. If as much as possible, please hang on to your Bitcoin. If you have to sell it because of your time preference, understand. I understand that you have to live. But don't look at it as an investment. Look at it as something to hang on to, because in that way, You're going to cause all these people that we've been studying for weeks in this book to go broke. Without their money, they have no power except the point of a gun. And who's going to pay for the gun? It makes perfect sense. We have to break these people. Sorry for the lecture. I'm going to tease the next episode a little bit. We're going to look further at the Federal Reserve. A lot of people think of it as the world's first central bank. We'll actually trace the lineage of central banks back to 1690. I'm going to remind you now to go to hodlandtees.org. Please support us. Please follow us. Please look at us on Spotify, on YouTube, hodlandtees.org. And here's a quick summary of the places where we would expect you and ask you, please, to follow us. Stack sats, wear the message, and keep on seeking. We love you. See you next time.